Hello there, adventurers of mana. I'm Caedo, and this is a blacksmithing and tempering guide for Legend of Mana. Some of you commenters from the tips and tricks, linked below, asked me for a tutorial on blacksmithing thanks to it being super complicated and underexplained. So thank you for the excuse. In this guide, we will start basic to get you used to the concepts of smithing with examples you can follow along with. After those basic concepts are established and hopefully understood, we can then delve into the rabbit hole that is the steps needed to prepare and create godlike gear. So let's get into smithing proper, shall we? The very first thing you'll need when you're getting into blacksmithing is the smithy itself. This is added to your workshops after you complete Watts Drops the Hammer, the second event that you get from Watts from the Ulcan Mines location. Perform Watts Drops the Hammer, go back home and into your workshops, take part in Watts' lackluster tutorial, and then you'll have the smithy ready and available to use. Next, we go over the differences of primary and secondary materials when it comes to smithing. The encyclopedias do tell you about these a little bit, but we might as well mention them here too because you will see them in your inventory labeled as primary or secondary. Primary materials such as wood, stone, metal, aerolites, etc. These are the things that the base item is made from and determine base stats. They also have their own resistances to certain elements, some higher than others. All of these secondary materials, like claws, feathers, crystals, and even produce and produce seeds can be used to alter or temper this equipment and can adjust that piece of gear's statistics in some way. So, primary for creating, secondary for modifying. Now for the hands-on stuff, starting with the items that you'll need if you want to follow along. If you intend on following the bouncing spring ball, so to speak, here's the grocery list of items that you will need for the 3 things we're going to craft. A lot of these items are common and you should find most of them just by playing. Also, if you have better primary metals to do this with, I recommend you do so. Like I said previously, each primary material has its own resistances to elements, so if these recipes aren't working, it might be the material you're working with. And I'm choosing Menos bronze for this because its resistances are some of the lowest, making it more malleable. We'll start with forging the most simplistic Menos bronze axe. If you don't have Menos bronze on hand, you can just purchase a Menos bronze axe in the weapon shop in Domina if need be. After forging or purchasing your Menos bronze axe, we will then select temper a weapon and the axe. You're then met with all of these secondary items you have in your inventory. Find a big seed, which should be towards the top right before produce, and hammer that into your axe. Yes, we're going to be pounding produce seeds into a weapon. Don't think on it too hard. Magic is everywhere. After the big seed goes in, you'll want to temper in a flat seed. And at this point, you'll see the attack power go up a little bit, from 10 to 11. Third to temper into our Menos bronze axe will be a flaming quill. We got the base damage where we want it at 12. Now we're going to do what is called varnishing, which is technically the last step in tempering. So we'll pound in 4 holy waters, and on the 4th step, cap it off with a giant's horn, finalizing the attack power of our Menos bronze axe to 22. If you followed step by step, you'll have a Menos bronze axe that's more than twice the damage it would be otherwise, with a wonderfully low amount of materials required. So now I'll go over what was actually happening in the weapon itself. The main things that will affect a weapon's base damage are its essence levels. This is the 8 elemental essences that are shown in the second info screen for the weapon. As the elemental essences go up, so will the weapon's attack power. These elemental essences are Dryad, Shade, Salamander, Undine, etc. Essences will manifest in a weapon when enough energy is provided to do so, and a secondary item is added that increases that essence. Sometimes this can take 2 or more items, because seeds naturally grant the Dryad essence and have energy value of their own. They were increasing Dryad level as they granted energy. The higher you can get these elemental essence levels, the higher the damage stats will be with a weapon. Armor is different, we'll get to that later. After the big seed, we tempered in the flat seed, which raised the Dryad essence to 3, and the axe's attack power up to 11. Then we saw our first Mystic card fly into the weapon. Even though this Dryad Mystic card came from the first seed, Mystic cards flying in will always be delayed by 1 or more. This is often visualized as 4 slots instead of 3, with the first slot being invisible. So after we tapped in the first seed, it didn't look like anything happened, but the Dryad card went into that invisible slot. Then, when the second seed came in, another Dryad was put into the invisible slot, pushing the first Dryad into the active Mystic card slots, raising the Dryad essence further. The third item we tempered in was a Flaming Quill. This was not added to create a Mystic card, but to contribute more energy, helping the Dryad essence increase up to 4, and raising the attack power of the weapon to 12. Because of using the Quill for energy instead of trying to get a Mystic card, the Dryads stay put for now. It's at this point where we've decided the essences have been raised enough, the base attack power is where we want it, and we're going to apply our finishing touch that maximizes that damage. That's why it's called varnishing. The final secondary items we choose for this will all grant a damage bonus to the weapon. All 4 of the holy waters that we put into this weapon are enough to push the 2 Dryad cards out, the Dryad essence level staying where it's at because nothing was conflicting with it. We'll get into that later. The holy waters take over all 3 of the visible mystic slots with the cleric card. The cleric card increases heavy damage by 50% but reduces slash damage by 50%. Even though the plus and minus being equal values sounds like a bad idea, the damage will start to increase after a couple holy waters are tempered in, and we see it shortly after. It skyrockets up to 17. And finally we cap it off with a giant's horn, raising the damage by another 50% without the need of a mystic card. This will show you that some secondary items do not always require a mystic card for their effects to kick in. Since this is supposed to be the final step in tempering, if any further tempering is done, all of the 50% damage bonuses will come off of the item. This is an extremely simplified version of the tempering process, but the main aspects are present: granting energy, raising elemental essence levels with that energy, and mystic cards. Not to worry if you're still confused, we have 2 more examples to go. I did state that armor is a bit different, so next we'll go over a simplified Menos bronze armor recipe. And hey, this one has less steps. Again, we're going to be using Menos bronze for this, but this can be any primary metal of your choosing. In fact, I recommend using whichever better metal that you have. Because of the defense stats being visually spread to 4 categories, that is strike, slash, thrust, and magic, I'll read out the defense stats as such. So with Menos bronze armor, it starts at 4, 4, 4, and 0. Once you have created your suit of armor, you will then go into alter armor, which is tempering for armor. Our first step will be to alter the armor with a big seed, just like the first step on the weapon. This grants us a little bit of Dryad essence, but we won't need any more than that because the elemental essences on armor don't raise defense stats by themselves. Because of that, we're going to varnish immediately with 4 needles and or needle lettuce, raising the defense stats to 13, 13, 13, and 2. Then we'll add 1 little eye to finalize the defense stats to 13, 16, 13, and 2. Since armor stats don't improve by themselves from elemental essences, like I said before, there is a greater importance placed on the primary material your armor is made from. This is why I advised making armor with the strongest metal that you have. Let's recap on what was happening when we were putting these things into the armor. The Menos bronze armor started with 4, 4, 4, and 0 for its defense stats. We added a big seed to raise the Dryad level above 0, specifically so step 2 can happen. We then started the varnishing process immediately, altering the armor with 4 needle and or needle lettuce, getting the Dryad Mystic card to appear and disappear as the Bed of Thorns took over. Thanks to that big seed raising the Dryad essence level, the Bed of Thorns was able to exist because it requires a Dryad level above 0. The effect of the Bed of Thorns card is a 50% defense boost across the board, with the trade-off of not being able to recover health. The defenses will easily surpass your need to heal in most cases. After the Bed of Thorns filled up the Mystic card slots, the defense stats dramatically jumped to 13, 13, 13, 2, and since we decided on varnishing immediately, our capper was a little eye to increase slash defense further up to 16. So the final stats for the Menos bronze armor are 13, 16, 13, 2. There's one more quick recipe I want to mention before we move on to the more advanced stuff, and these are just some minor adjustments to the one we just went over. Since standard armor pieces don't provide much magic resistance, we'll balance it out with a Menos bronze ring, which provides only magic resistance. So we make ourselves a Menos bronze ring that starts out with a magic defense of 2. From there we follow the same first 2 steps as the Menos bronze armor, putting in 1 big seed to raise the Dryad essence a little bit, then 4 needle/needle lettuce for that Bed of Thorn, increasing the magic resistance dramatically this time. Now, instead of a little eye, which raises a defense stat this ring does not have, we'll be capping this off with a creepy eye because it raises magic defense further by 25%. And there is a Menos bronze ring with 10 magic defense that will complement the Menos bronze armor. With your matching Menos bronze set equipped, you'll have around 13 to each of your defense stats, which is is pretty decent, especially for first playthroughs. As I mentioned at the start of this section, the better primary metal you use, generally the better stats the base item will have. So if you do have something better than Menos Bronze in these examples, go ahead and use it. Now that we've gone over the 3 beginner step-by-step recipes, we'll do a quick recap just to make sure we're all on the same page. In order to raise essence levels on weapons or armor, you'll need items that provide energy and the essence in question. We use seeds for this because they provide both energy and dryad essence, indicated by the dryad cards appearing and disappearing. Essences directly affect damage on weapons, but do not directly affect defense on armor, and that's where varnishing and mystic cards really shine. Each piece of equipment has 4 mystic card slots. The very first one is going to be invisible, which means if you're creating a mystic card with an item you're tempering in, adding something that creates a second mystic card will push that first one into view and in some cases activate its effects. And once all the slots fill up, new mystic cards will push the old ones out. As you saw through the varnishing techniques of both weapons and armor, mystic cards can be extremely powerful in raising the important stats of those items. So recap finished. I hope you've got the basics because we're getting into the serious preparation for making that godlike gear. Players who choose to continue playing in New Game Plus will have a much easier time farming primary and secondary materials from enemies thanks to the Forbidden Tome. This is a book that shows up in your encyclopedias after you've beaten the game once, and lets you adjust difficulty, which changes enemy levels and power, unlocking more of their loot tables too. No future mode will give you the best chance for loot, but enemies will also have tons of health and deal lots of damage. If you are still on your first playthrough, you'll want to stick to whatever weapons or materials you can get from the city furthest from your house, or primary materials given as rewards from late quests. Lorimar Iron, for example, is what I got late into my first playthrough, and what I used for my first hard-hitting weapon this time. The reason I suggest this for first playthroughs is that the enemies might not even reach the level needed to drop the primary materials you need, most enemies needing to be level 32 or higher to even have a chance to drop the rare items. Whether you're in first or second playthrough, there is a pet that will improve your odds greatly. Polter boxes are the best pet for farming items, and come from Magicali eggs, formerly poltergeist eggs, found in either the junkyard or the Tower of Leers. Unfortunately, for every other pet, the Polter box overshadows all the other one's synchro effects because of what it does in relation to the game's loot. The Polter box pet has the rare item synchro effect, and when in synchro range or right next to the player, the Polter box skips the first 2 items in enemy loot pools if they die while you're synced up, usually just removing experience and loot crave from the table. In taking the first 2 items out of an 8-item loot pool, it reduces level requirements for the rest of the items, letting you access all of an enemy's loot pool when they're at level 32 or higher as opposed to level 63 or higher if you didn't have a Polter box. So since Legend of Mana has a heavy focus on the need for items, just having a Polter box on your team can make a difference of hours of farming versus minutes of farming. Pet raising and working with the corral is a whole different thing, and feeding that occurs after every level can help guarantee that your Polter box will survive. Suggesting the dietary needs of your Polter box isn't what this guide is about at all. So all I'll recommend on that front is Squalfins to give it the friendly and lonely personalities. Personalities dictate your pet's AI, and a pet who has the friendly and lonely personalities will be more likely to stay next to the player, making synchro effects less of a chore. Remember, if you are feeding your pet to get these personalities, it takes hold immediately after you place items in the feed box, so you can check while it's grazing and reload if no personalities appear. There are tons of primary materials to make your gear out of, and you may want to experiment, which I encourage. But here I'll be suggesting the strongest primary materials that you can temper into something powerful, and where you can get them. One of the first you'll probably have access to, most likely without even knowing, is the full metal primary material. And despite having metal in the name, it's actually got a category of its own, and is not in the metals category, so it will be further down your inventory list. Full metal has the same essence resistances as Menos bronze, so the same processes we use for Menos bronze will work just fine with full metal too. Full metal is the final item in the loot table of pincher grabs, which are found on Medora Beach. And very early on, you'll have encounters with 3 of them at a time, which will up your odds pretty dramatically so long as they're level 32 and you have a Polter box with you. Next is Adamantite, and it's considered to be a better version of Full Metal, also with the same elemental resistances as Menos Bronze, so previous recipes will work just fine. Adamantite is a rare drop from Chest Knights, which can be found in several locations, including the Tower of Leers. The third primary material I want to mention is Dragon Scales, that has a lower resistance to essence level raising than Menos Bronze, and is generally a strong material to work with for both weapons and armor. You can get dragon scales from, you guessed it, dragons, specifically the land and aerial dragons. Kid dragons do not drop dragon scales. You can find one aerial dragon hanging out in the Feig snowfields with a couple of rabbits, but also if you're doing the main quest arc revolving around dragons, when a temporary location called the Flames appears, there will be a central room in here where you can fight 2 land dragons at once, which is also great for experience and getting incinerated by their flame breath. Again, all these enemies that I mentioned will need to be level 32 or higher while you have a Polter box with you and using the synchro effect to get their rare primary materials to drop. Level 63 or higher otherwise. Late game tempering gets expensive, and if that is your plan, you're gonna need some extra lucre. There are 2 methods that I like to use, one of which I can't find the actual source for, so I apologize to whoever came up with this recipe, but those of you veterans will already know which one I'm going for. It is the wind cap recipe, which is 1 wind cap altered with 4 clear feathers. Just doing this short recipe on a wind cap will cause its lucre value to go from 4 to 26,000. All the items you need for this recipe are also in the same place. The wind caps drop from spiny cones, and clear feathers drop from stinger bugs. Both of these enemies appear in Luon Highway, one of the first dungeons you'll go to in the game. The money-making method I use a bit more, and which was included in the tips and tricks, is the Feig snowfields method. Towards the end area of the snowfields is where dragon eggs spawn, as well as elemental spirits like any other egg location. If you fill up the corral with dragon eggs and go to sell another pet when prompted again, you can sell previous eggs you picked up at the cost of the dragon they contain. That's 500 to 5,000 lucre each. I consider the Feig snowfields a bit more efficient because spirits will appear in the same place and you need spirit coins as well, making that location alone doubly useful. Oh, and I also dropped the Sword of Mana artifact next to the Feig snowfields to max out mana levels, so all spirits will show up there. So those are a couple of good ways to make lucre. While we did go over the Dryad essence while we were adding them to weapons and armor, Dryad is only one of the 8 elemental spirits, and if we're getting serious about tempering and stuff like that, we need to talk about the spirits themselves and their conflicts, as well as gathering elemental spirit coins. As we covered a tiny bit earlier, there are 8 elemental essences, or elemental spirits. Wisp represents light, Shade is darkness, Dryad is nature, Aura is materialism or gold, Salamander is fire, Gnome is earth, Jinn is air, Undine is water. If you're familiar with any game that has elemental systems, you'll know that there are conflicts or strengths and weaknesses versus each other. Each of these 8 essences work in a similar way. For a quick example, water puts out fire, so Undine will consume Salamander. Thankfully, there are specific orders in which you can raise essence levels to prevent conflict as much as possible. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to share the order in which I raise essences on my own gear, but there are a couple of other orders you can use with the same result. First to raise in the essence levels would be Shade, second is Wisp, third is Dryad, fourth is Aura, fifth is Salamander, sixth is Jinn. The first 6 will not have any conflicts as long as Shade and Wisp remain at the same level. We keep going to the 7th, which is Gnome, then 8th, which is Undine. Gnome and Undine will conflict with Jinn and Salamander, but there's nothing stopping you from just doing the first 6 essences and ignoring the last 2. You'll still temper a pretty powerful item if you exclude 2 essences. There is a tempering trick that allows you to negate conflicts, but we've got to talk about getting elemental coins to raise said essences first. Like the seeds that we used in the example recipes, the coins themselves provide some energy, and will add elemental essence at the same time. But unlike seeds, aren't limited to just Dryad. This aspect, that is, getting elemental coins, is actually tutorialized in Legend of Mana pretty well. A student at the Academy of Magic will eventually pop out of your workshop and give you the rundown on Enchanted Instruments 101, instruments that are used to cast spells or appease the spirits, which is what we're after. If you play the right song and get them to move close enough to speak to them, they can grant you a boon of 3 gold and or silver coins. Coins that are the most efficient way to raise essence levels when tempering. But the best part about completing this quest is now you have access to the elemental spirits. You've been to the world map and you've seen the elemental spirit levels on the lower left hand side. When you hover your cursor around a location, you'll see its mana levels. Those are also indicators on what spirits will appear at that location. Nearly every dungeon in the game has a location where you can encounter spirits and monster eggs. They appear in the same exact spot. This will either be in dead ends or arenas where you had fought bosses. After you find your elemental spirits this way, play the music till they get close enough, grab some coins, and farm some more. To raise each essence to decent levels when tempering gear, you're going to want 4 silver coins of each element or more. Don't worry about gold coins so much. In fact, you can use those to make more instruments. So the amount of encounters needed for 4 coins of each will be at least 16 encounters. And thanks to the mana levels of different areas, that affects which spirits will appear. But better to have too many than not enough spirit coins. So if you fully intend on getting serious about tempering and getting those essence levels as high as you possibly can, spirit coins are the first integral part of the advanced methods we're going to go over in a little while. But for now, we'll move on to another integral part, which is maximizing energy gain. So we know at this point that energy is required to raise the essence levels when tempering an item, and when introduced with spirit coins, the elemental essences use that energy to manifest and raise essence levels in your gear. In the case of weapons, this raises attack power. And here is where blacksmithing gets expensive. While elemental spirit coins can raise essence levels on their own, the required energy becomes more costly as you raise essence levels. Glow crystals in particular are what will help you most in this process. When a glow crystal is tempered into a piece of equipment, the card it produces will be the Dawn Nymph. The energy gain isn't immediate, but instead when the Dawn Nymph leaves the item. This is why you will see many recipes put a stack of glow crystals in so the elemental coins can push them out. So, in other words, following up glow crystals with elemental coins will increase that essence level by a sizable chunk thanks to the energy provided by these glow crystals. Since the idea here is to raise all essence levels in weapons especially, there will be conflicts between at least 2 elements, and that is where chaos crystals come in. Tempering in a chaos crystal will bring in the Ancient Moon mystic card, and will put a stop to any essence conflicts as long as the Ancient Moon is present even in the invisible mystic card slot. So glow and chaos crystals are both important. Glow crystals for jacking up that energy higher, and chaos for nullifying conflicts. There are 2 ways to obtain glow and chaos crystals. First would be from jewelry shops in Lumina and or Geo, where glow crystals will cost 2,000 lucre each and chaos crystals will cost 5,000. Pretty pricey. The second way to get glow and chaos crystals would be from enemy Polter boxes. You know, the hostile versions of the Polter box pet you should have at this point. These enemy Polter boxes can be found in groups of 2 on the SS Buccaneer. You'll need to ensure that enemy Polter boxes are level 32 or higher to get them to drop the crystals that you need. Glow crystals are one part of the extreme energy process, while combining Mercury and Sulfur with them can improve essence levels even more. Instead of increasing the energy pool, Mercury and Sulfur produce Wizard Mystic cards, reducing essence raising costs. Mercury, which produces the Witch Mystic card, lowers energy costs for Shade, Aura, Jinn, and Undine. Sulfur, on the other hand, produces the Sorcerer card, and lowers energy costs for Wisp, Dryad, Salamander, and Gnome. Mercury and Sulfur are sold for 300 lucre each from level 2 material shops. The level of a shop will be dependent on how far a city is placed from your home. If you don't have a shop that provides Mercury and Sulfur, you'll be kind of stuck with the few you get from chests until your New Game Plus. A reminder that even Mercury and Sulfur are not required for getting decent levels of essences, but they do make the process more cost effective and take less time, and as expected will be used in the recipes at the end. The last thing I want to touch on before we get into the powerful gear recipes is stats and plunge attacks. By this point, you probably gathered that secondary items as well as the mystic cards they produce can act separately. We saw that in varnishing. Depending on the items used, attributes can be altered, status immunities can be granted, and even attack modifiers can be added to weapons. Here's some examples of each. Yggdrasil is a powerful mystic card created by Spiny Seeds, its appearance requiring a Dryad essence above 4. As long as Yggdrasil is at the top of the mystic card slots, it will allow every attribute to be raised to 10 if you continue using said Spiny Seeds. Bed of Thorns, as you saw with the Varnishing of Armor, is a mystic card created with Needles or Needle Lettuce when Dryad is above 0. The card itself stops health regeneration, but in turn improves defense stats on armor by 50% each. With 3 Bed of Thorns in the mystic card slots, that bonus would reach 150%. The Cleric card, activated by Holy Water, boosts heavy damage on weapons by 50% while reducing slash by 50%, and is a great mystic card for varnishing weapons. For armor, the Cleric will raise strike and slash defenses by 50%, and is a good alternative if the Bed of Thorns regen trade-off isn't for you. Something that is less apparent is the Holy Water itself also has the unique item effect of kicking usually unwanted pixie cards off of an item. Holy Water has many uses. The secondary item Stinky Breath will give poison and confusion immunity to armor pieces, and while it does produce a pixie card, the pixie is not what causes the immunities, but instead the Stinky Breath itself. Lastly, for this section about the plunge attack stuff, plunge attacks can be permanent additions to your weapons with the proper mystic card, and are modified versions of the thrust, uppercut, and jump master moves, which are pulled off with directional inputs alongside your power attacks. For instance, to get the Trident plunge attack for your spear, you'll need the Ocean God mystic card to appear. That was an unintentional rhyme. Squalfin or Orca plants are used to trigger the Ocean God card, but you'll need an Undine essence greater than 2 and a total essence above 4 to make the Ocean God appear. After the Ocean God appears, and even after it's gone, Trident will be a permanent addition under the spear's master moves unless it's replaced. These are just a handful of the mystic cards and item powers that I consider to be helpful. It would take way too much time going over every single item, so the sources that I based my own research on are linked below if you really want to dive in. To round off this guide, and to summarize all the things we talked about, I'll show you a step-by-step universal powerful weapon recipe, as well as a recipe for a status immunity amulet, or a ribbon, as it's commonly known. We'll start with the universal Dragon Scales weapon recipe. These are the items you will need. I'll be making myself a Dragon Scale spear, but excluding the varnishing technique, this method works for any weapon type. One quick tip before we start is to remember to save after raising each essence where you want it. I myself screw up order of tempering sometimes, and would rather create checkpoints for myself than start completely over if I mess up. So make it a habit to save each time you finish with one of the essences. Let's start. We head on into the blacksmith and go to forge a weapon. So I pick spear, I pick Dragon Scales as my primary material, and go ahead and forge it. The Dragon Scales spear starts at 65 attack power. This is before we've done anything to modify it, so I bet you can imagine where the damage is going to go by the end. Then when we jump into tempering, we start with 2 glow crystals, follow those up with 2 shade silver, follow those up with 3 glow crystals, then add 2 mercury to create witch cards to reduce the costs of shade towards the end, and then add 2 more shade silver. This should result in 7 to your shade essence on the weapon. This brings the spear up to 97 attack power. Next is the exact same process but with wisp. 2 glow crystals, then 2 wisp, then 3 glow crystals, then 2 sulfur, which creates the sorcerer, which reduces the energy cost for wisp, then follow up the 2 sulfur with 2 more wisp silver. And just like shade, wisp should be up to 7, and the attack power of the spear is at 130. Dryad's turn, and it's the same thing. 2 glow crystals, 2 dryad silver, 3 glow crystals, 2 sulfur, and 2 dryad silver. We got a little bit of a bigger bonus here, thanks to the Dragon Scale's lower resistance to dryad essence. Dryad has been raised up to 8, and the spear now has 167 attack power. We've now moved on to aura, and since wisp and shade are of the same number or the same value, aura won't be conflicting with dryad. So we add 2 glow crystals, 2 aura silver, 3 glow crystals, 2 mercury, and then 2 aura silver. The ending result for aura is a essence level of 8, putting the spear at 204 attack power. We're only halfway through the essences, and this is a pretty good amount of attack power for any playthrough, but we're gonna keep going. Next up in the order of raising is Salamander. 2 glow crystal, 2 salamander silver, 3 glow crystal, 2 sulfur, and 2 salamander silver. The result of this is a salamander essence level of 8 and 241 attack power on the spear. The final non-conflict essence is going to be Jinn. So, as always, up until this point, we start with 2 glow crystals, add in 2 Jinn silver, 3 glow crystals, 2 mercury, and 2 Jinn silver. This puts Jinn essence at 8, and the spear at 278 power. Now we switch gears for the conflicting essences. These ones have about double the steps. So let's start with a gnome silver, then add 1 chaos crystal. When we add the next Gnome Silver in, we'll be shown the Ancient Moon card, which allows conflicting essences to coexist without consuming each other. After that second Gnome Silver, we add a Glow Crystal to get that energy back up, 2 Sulfur to reduce the energy costs, another Chaos Crystal to keep the anti-conflict going, 1 Gnome Silver, then 2 Sulfur, then 1 Glow Crystal. The result of these energy gymnastics is 7 Gnome Essence level and a spear with 311 attack power. Finally, Undine, who would be consumed by Jinn if we let conflicts happen. And now with Undine, we will use the same process. 1 Undine Silver, 1 Chaos Crystal, another Undine Silver, 1 Glow Crystal, 2 Mercury, then 1 more Chaos Crystal, 1 Undine Silver, 2 Mercury, and then 1 Glow Crystal. This ends up giving us another essence level of 7 for Undine, and the base power of the spear is stopping at 343. We're not quite done yet though. Before we get to the varnishing, we're now going to introduce a plunge attack to the spear. For that, we will need to create the Ocean God card, which we can do with a Squalfin or an Orca plant produce item. Once we add one of those, we will then rinse the item with 3 lily pods. I didn't really go over rinsing, but basically lily pods are one of the most neutral items and produce the Enticed Nymph Mystic card that will clean off other cards in case there's effects left over, hence rinsing. Finally, we arrive at the varnishing process for our Dragon Scales weapon. For this spear in particular, we're going to add 4 bumpkins to ensure that all 3 Mystic card slots are taken up by the Clown card. Clown adds plus 50% to slash damage, and that's multiplied by 3, but also reduces heavy damage by 50% times 3. Then we add a Sharp Claw as our cap, resulting in a Dragon Scale spear that has a monstrous 711 attack power. I need to remind you right now, we could have stopped at half of that and been fine in no future mode. No, we had to go further, and we did. If the weapon you chose is not a spear and it doesn't have the attack power you're hoping for, try the 4 Holy Waters and Giant's Horn Varnish instead. Like armor, a weapon's damage types are split into 4. They're just not shown to the player like armor values, so we get to guess sometimes. Weapons like the hammer have more focus on heavy instead of slash. In fact, if you made a hammer with this recipe and are using the Cleric Varnish from Holy Water, you're going to be breaking 900 damage with a hammer. So that's a good time. We're now at the second and final endgame recipe for the ribbon or a Lapis Lazuli pendant that I like to make. Here is the list of things needed for the recipe, as well as some optionals if you want an attribute boost on top. After selecting Create Armor in the Blacksmith, we will pick Pendant, and our primary material will be Lapis Lazuli. After it's made, we switch to Alter Armor, select the ribbon to be. First to go in is a Glow Crystal. We then bring in 2 Salamanders to start gobbling up that energy, and 1 Sulfur to reduce the costs, raising up Salamander to 5. We then add our 1 Sharp Claw and 1 Stinky Breath. And after the Stinky Breath goes in, we get 3 immunities for Poison, Confusion, and Freeze. The God of Destruction from the Sharp Claw is what provides the Freeze immunity. Next, we need to do a little consumption to get rid of Salamander, because the next immunities require Salamander to be at 0. So we'll add 1 Glow Crystal, and see a goddamn pixie come in from the Stinky Breath, then add 2 Undine Silver, 1 Squalfin or Orca Plant, and 1 Fishy Fruit. This drops Salamander to 0 and raises Undine to 3. While the Ocean God card came in, thanks to the Squalfin or Orca Plant, granting Flame immunity. These next 3 don't require cards and are item-based immunities. So first is the Blackened Bat, that gives darkness immunity. Next is the Zombie Claw, which gives paralysis immunity. And after that, we'll use a Ghost's Howl for sleep immunity. We then use 1 Holy Water to kick out that pixie that's been sticking around way too long since the Stinky Breath was put in, which also pushes down the Sacrifice Nymph card, granting Petrify immunity from the Ghost's Howl as well. Now this pendant is a proper ribbon and has all status immunities, but we've yet to choose a varnish option, so we'll start with the easier one. This first one you've seen before, and it's just to maximize magical defense. It starts with 1 Big Seed, followed by 4 Needles and or Needle Lettuce to bring Bed of Thorns in and cover all the Mystic card slots, then 1 Creepy Eye to raise the magic defense further for a total of 78 magic defense. When I first made one of these, the defenses didn't matter nearly as much as the status immunities this thing gave, because you can get stun locked with them if you're not careful, and in higher levels of difficulty, you can get straight up killed that way. We're done with the regular varnish, let's go over the optional. While a little bit costly when it comes to materials and lower magical defense, it will raise all attributes by 10 also. So instead of a Big Seed, we'll start with 2 Glow Crystals, add a Dryad Silver, then 3 Sulfur, and then another Dryad Silver. This will bring Dryad up to 5 and what we need for the next process. We'll then put in 2 Needle or Needle Lettuce for at least a couple of Bed of Thorn, then 2 Spiny Seeds. This creates the Yggdrasil card and brings the attribute max up to 10, so long as it stays in the dominant slot. Then, to raise each attribute further without creating cards, we use 2 Dragon's Breath and 3 Dragon Blood. The end result of this varnish is 42 magic defense, all status immunity, and a plus 10 to all attributes. Pretty dang nice when a ribbon does extra stuff. I imagine this guide was longer than some of you expected, and for that I apologize. And I don't like saying that this kinda just scratches the surface of what you can do with tempering. And because it only scratches the surface, I'll have links to resources down below that both help me create this guide as well as my cheat sheet containing tables and such for the things we went over in this video. And while we're talking about it, big thanks to M. Majara for his Tempering for Dummies guide, Epithumia, Mist Eric Airy, and Beakuts for the blacksmithing calculator known as Mana Forge. Thank you to my patrons, on screen now, Wasteland Legends Sven and Six by name, and thank you so very much for watching. I'm Caedo Genesis, and may you wander the universe of mana like you own it.